Alright, everyone, this is David with 3 Orcs here. Today we're going to crack open and review the new Greyhawk Player's Guide by Joseph Block. This is really exciting because he's been working on this for a very long time, and a new player's guide for Greyhawk hasn't been created since the Living Greyhawk days. This is presented as a campaign supplement, offering essential information to players in the World of Greyhawk campaign. Now, this guide aims to be a helpful resource for both newcomers and veterans of Greyhawk. It's not an exhaustive encyclopedia, but a solid foundation for your Greyhawk campaigns. The author is a longtime Greyhawk enthusiast. He wants to bring back that old school flavor, much like myself, what I do with my campaign. But he also wants to keep this accessible to modern players, the same as I do for the modules I produce on the DM's Guild. You might see some terminology like dwarf for dwarves and olven for elves, which is a nice touch to the Greyhawk feel. Importantly, the author also mentions his work includes new creations, in keeping with the innovative spirit of Greyhawk. So what can we expect in this guide? Wizard class, options, character origins, backgrounds, species, spell descriptions, the gods of Greyhawk, and a map of the Flaness. The World of Greyhawk was first published back in 1980 in a concise 32-page folio with fantastic maps. Since then, it's been expanded many times and it still has a vibrant fan community. Now, the original details are sparse, but this allows the Dungeon Masters plenty of room for their own creativity to create their own campaign world in Greyhawk. Now, the author does highlight specific key aspects of Greyhawk, like a balance of good and evil, law and chaos, constantly shifting, never allowing one side to have dominance over the other. Even a mysterious organization called the Scarlet Brotherhood, suggesting another shift in the balance. It really creates this dynamic, evolving world. This much like what Living Greyhawk did in the 2000s, from 2000 to 2008. Now let's go ahead and look at the player's handbook. Hello, this is the front page of the guide you'll be getting. You can purchase this on the DM's Guild, and it's only, I believe, $14.95, which is a really good price for an entire player's guide for a campaign world. Remember that Wizards of the Coast allowed us to create and sell Greyhawk material on DM's Guild for 50% of the profits. So the price is very minimal compared to what you're going to get and what WotC keeps. Joseph Block did mention that all his artwork is handmade from a stable of artists he commissions. The front page of the player's guide looks good. It's an action picture. That's the problem with the latest editions of Dungeons and Dragons, is that they don't have a lot of action artwork in their supplements. They're pretty static. They don't have a lot of theme, or they don't have a lot of story in the image itself. There's not a lot of emotion. From this picture, there is quite a bit of emotion because it looks like Mordenkainen is battling with his buddy, maybe another wizard, against a horde of trolls, I believe. And as you can see, a title is Essential Information. A player needs to play a heroic character in the World of Greyhawk and fantasy settings. All right, let's go ahead down to the first page in the campaign supplement. Joseph Block is known as the Greyhawk Grognard. You can find him at greyhawkgrognard.com. He's been posting blogs for years, like over 15 years, I believe, and he's put a lot of research into this. He's instrumental in a lot of the material that I publish as well, that you can find over at worldanvil.com, which is the Verbabonk campaign guide for running the Temple of Elemental Evil. So my efforts are focused on the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign in the Verbabonk area. I zoom in with a magnifying glass and detail every town, shop, NPC, and organization in the area, where this campaign guide is more focused on the entire campaign world. You can run adventures in any part of the world for your players to have fun. It looks like as you see here, his company is BRW Games that he publishes under, and his credit page does show that he honors Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, and all the different campaign worlds. And work is copyrighted by Wizards of the Coast, but used with permission under the Community Contact Agreement with Dungeon Masters Guild. That's important. You cannot publish this material anywhere else but the Dungeon Masters Guild, hence they get their 50%. But, it's a privilege because until 6 months ago, you weren't allowed to publish any Greyhawk material anywhere. It was banned for over 10 years. So now we're allowed to support our beloved campaign world. The original material is copyrighted 2024 by BRW Games. And his cartography and artwork there. And also he's got an official website for his brwgames.com. Okay, let's get down to the table of contents. I should move along so this video isn't like 5 hours long. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. And I'll just relate to my campaign how useful it would be for me. The contents cover every chapter in the book, which is great. And they are clickable links, so it can take you anywhere. And also on the left is a bookmark section that can take you to any page. That's something that has to do with the PDF application. And I don't use PDF applications for my published material, so I don't have a bookmarks border on my material on the left-hand side, but all my contents are clickable. I see it tackles lands, languages, classes, species, spells, and gods. This book covers only the bare minimum a player needs to play in the campaign. In fact, the player's handbook from the first edition, I believe, had a lot more information than this, except it didn't have the gods of Greyhawk in that book. That was covered in other supplemental books, and I believe, and mentioned also in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So it's a mixed bag of what he thinks a player really needs to run this game. So we'll see how that turns out. So he's got a preface. He talks about the beginnings of the world of Greyhawk in 1980, like I mentioned. He says he presents this work in his humble attempt to introduce new players to the setting, which I agree with. And it's also a great resource for old hands. It's not an encyclopedia to bury you in detail. So that's good. That means it's referenceable, which is my standard when I'm writing my articles in PDFs. I get the idea from Old School Essentials, how they write their modules, which is the best standard in the industry. One of the goals of this book is to bring back a little of the old school flavor with the settings. We went over that already. And the book is accompanying the Greyhawk campaign guide. Now, the other book that you can buy for $14.95, I believe, on DM's Guild is called the Greyhawk Campaign Guide, and that's for the Dungeon Master. That way he can run his campaign. And it gives your player a solid boost into the setting. The Greyhawk fan community is large and varied, and the reader is encouraged to check out some of the offerings. I highly encourage you to reach out to these websites and read the original material, the original articles. I've done on my articles, and it looks like he's done it as well. He abbreviated a lot and made it concise, so it's referenceable at the table, which is really important when you're trying to run a game. So he mentions YouTube, Cannon Fire, Anna Meyer's photography website. She makes all the maps for Greyhawk, and Greyhawk Online. So he ends that with take the words to heart and make Greyhawk your own, which is basically the motto of most Greyhawk content makers and dungeon masters. All right, looks like he's from New Jersey. Okay, so the next page will be the introduction. It goes over a lot of things I mentioned before about the balance, chaos and law, evil and good. He mentions the powerful forces in the Flan is beyond actively move the pendulum. Strive to make sure that one does swing. It doesn't swing too far in either direction. The Archmage Mordenkainen and the Circle of Eight, as well as the higher echelons of the druidical hierarchies, are actively engaged in the pursuit of balance, and that often work behind the scenes to scuttle the ascendance of either good or evil. And I have a lot of that in my campaign because of the Druids of the Gnarly. A lot of that's going on with the second rising of the Temple of Evil. The Flan is a continent. It goes over, explaining things here. And then he talks about the different kings and rulers, lands, and more artwork on the right. If I scroll back up, he talks about the Overking and the Great Kingdom, and southwestern Flan, the Seldamore Valley. Living Greyhawk back in the day, in the 2000s, they would have different states of the United States, actually different states and countries around the world, be responsible for different lands to run at conventions and write modules. Seldamore Valley had a big following back in the day, and they have a lot of modules. Now, there's thousands of modules written in the Living Greyhawk days. They're just not published because they're not allowed to. They're actually owned copyright by the original authors in Living Greyhawk. But Dungeon Master's Guild will allow us to borrow that information from those articles to use on our own, as long as we credit our source. So we scroll past down to the geography. Greyhawk is one of the major cities in the campaign. Often, but not exclusively used as a center for campaigns, but not the name of the world as a whole. Orth is the name of the planet, which the city of Greyhawk can be found. There's 4 continents. So he goes over everything you need to know, the basics of what this land is like. And he follows that up with a map. That's the continent of Auric in the world of Orth. And that's a fairly newer map. They've been working on these maps for years with Anna Myers and other artists. And this is basically what they've gotten so far out of all their research and trials and efforts. And it looks really good. But this particular map is just to give you an idea what the continent looks like. Down to the next page is Lands of the Flaness. So this is a short, concise description of every country in the land and geographical area, maybe. You know, you have Selene, the reclusive elven realm. They keep to themselves and don't like outsiders. Their green wine, however, is said to be exquisite. I have a lot of detail of Selene in my campaign because they're right next to the Viscounty of Verbank. They closed their borders. The gift of beauty was supposed to be delivered there to open their borders. Now everybody's really upset because it was raided and taken by the agents of the Temple of Elemental Evil. So a lot of that's going on. And I like how you have a little brief description of each of these lands, like the Bandit Kingdoms, and Bissell, and the Bone Marts, Irongate, Uis, Keeland. And there's not a lot of information here, but it's a short descriptor in one concise area of this document to look up something really quick. Like, what is that country called again? You know, what's that country about again? And this will give you a short little description of what that is really quickly. It's kind of like when you search for Google and the first thing that pops up is a little description of what you're looking for. And we got more artwork here. This cool looking goblin. So it's a big list of countries here. It's quite large, as you can see as I'm scrolling through this. In fact, there's 3 different Ulics: the Principality, the Duchy, and the County of Ulic, and the islands, and Stonefist, and the Wild Coast, which is on the border of my Temple of Elemental Evil campaign, because the slavers there are doing trade and collaborating and working with the Temple of Elemental Evil agents, supplying slaves to the temple. And they travel along the forest road. And the pirates take the rivers, of course, of the slaver ships. So that's all very detailed out in my campaign world. And I see that the last one on this list is Zeph, Baklunis country, and the fringes of the Flaness all the way to the west. That's great. All right, so past page 10, we're into the languages. And I like how you created these little charts for the languages because it's very quick to reference. And I like how you added the script so you can tell any documents of what they're written in, which is something I never considered before. So this is very useful information. I like this part a lot because you got the common, but the common language is spoken. But when you read common on a document, it's actually in Oeridian. And also Flan is in Flan, and Baklunis is in Baklunis. And so they also have a description of each of these races too here. Actually, a description of the race and the language they use, which is very useful. And then on the right, there's exotic languages, things that normally don't always pop up in everybody's campaign, but like I said before, it depends where you're running your campaign in. You know, Greyhawk is huge. And that's the thing about my 3 Orcs website and my Discord channel and my YouTube channel is I'm very narrow focused, so I don't get a lot of subscribers that you would think I would get, because not only do you have to like old school D&D, but you have to like Greyhawk, and then you have to like running your campaign in the Riverbank area around the Temple of Elemental Evil. That's a very narrow focus. It is the most popular campaign ever in the history of Dungeons and Dragons, but still, only so many Dungeon Masters are running it. Another thing that's so narrow focused about my efforts is that all my gear is really focused on Dungeon Masters, providing material for Dungeon Masters. But that's what I used to do for a living. I used to work with TSR, and I had to go to conventions and recruit Dungeon Masters and train them how to run the tournaments. All right, so we go down farther past all these races. And there's quite a bit here. Velandi is interesting. It's a tribal dialect of Oeridian, spoken as the primary language by the rural folk and peasants along the border between Veluna and Thurandi. It's incomprehensible to other speakers of Common. In my campaign, that could come up, so that's something I got to remember for my campaign. Another thing I need to mention is something he didn't mention here, I believe. Yeah, something else I got to mention that he didn't mention here, I believe. There's very few direct whole races. Over the centuries of migrations from the west after the huge war, there's a lot of intermingling of races. Very few areas of the Flaness are strictly solely one race. Typically, 99% of all the NPCs you find in the campaign, especially around Verbank, they're multi-class, they're multi-racial. A lot of them are Oeridian, Suel, or Oeridian Flan. There's a lot of Flan in my area, you know, and I have descriptions of what these races look like on my website too, you know, descriptors. Okay, so I scroll past this section down to the next page, which is classes. Now, all the character classes are listed in the player's handbook are available for player characters in the Greyhawk campaign. And there's a good picture of, I think that's a rogue or something. A pretty cool looking picture. It's another action pose, which is great. I'm in favor of that. So the first race is the Barbarian, which hails back to... The Barbarian wasn't available in the first edition D&D book, but it did come out in the Unearthed Arcana, I believe, later, a couple years later, about 1985, 1983, somewhere in there. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. You know, as you get a little bit older, your memory starts to slip. And sometimes you can't even remember a word. And you said that word a billion times over your lifetime and you still can't remember it. Okay, it's a good, interesting description of Nomad. It's very brief. I'm working on Barbarian choice in my campaign in the Temple of Elemental Evil, and I wanted to give reasons why a Barbarian player would be in the area, since these Barbarian tribes are very far away, all the way to the north or all the way to the west. But it's okay if a Barbarian happens to be in the area as a player character, and he's got to have a reason why he came all the way down here. And as a Dungeon Master, I personally give them a little side quest or a background quest to give them a reason why they're down here and give them a reason for being, give them something to do. And I was looking into what possible origins a Barbarian would be from, and I see here that on the right he names some of the tribes and some general locations that they're from, but he doesn't go into a lot of detail exactly where they're from or name of the leaders or tribes or anything like that. So it's very vague when it comes to that information. But he does go into subclasses. Now, these subclasses are definitely 5th edition stuff. You can role play these subclasses in any edition of D&D. You know, first edition, you can be the Path of the Vet and role play him by his description, the clothes he wears, the combat style, the kind of armor and weapons he uses. It's all role playing. You can role play as that character. But people that play 5th edition, they want defined rules, and that's what this gives you. So it gives you also, if you're not very familiar with the setting, you know, this gives you an idea of what you can be in the setting, and that's useful too. Because not everybody is a lore Greyhawk expert. So they want something they can look up real quick and say, hey, that sounds cool, I want to be that guy. So this one's dedicated to the god of the north, Vatten, the god of the cold, winter, and Arctic beasts. At level 3, he gets a Ruin Frost, level 6, a Ruin of Snow, and level 10, a Ruin of Ice. So these are little extra side spells, bonus spells, I suppose, or abilities when they go up levels. And then on the right-hand side is the Path of the Totem Warrior, and he's constrained to his choice of an animal from his homeland, like a polar bear. Level 3 is the Spirit Seeker, and that's cool. Then there's a chart. So these are animals that you can get. So this gives you a little more idea of where these barbarians could come from. The tiger nomads, wolf and hunting lands, and hold of the stone fist. So that's cool, even from the Amido jungles from the south, and what kind of animal you can have a companion for. And level 3 is the totem spirit, and then he gives you little bonuses for these animals too. You know, what they can give you, I suppose. Like a horse, while raging, your base speed is increased by 10 feet per turn or round or something. So at level 6, you get an aspect of the beast, and he writes another description of what bonuses you get. And at 14th, another one, and what bonuses you get, depending on the animal. So that's kind of cool. All right, the next one down is a bard. A good description of what a bard looks like in that campaign setting. And so this is a good example. He's probably got Suel in him. I would say, and he's a little bit olive complexion, so he's probably Oeridian, and Suel mix. That's probably what he is. It could be all three too. So bards are different. Let's see how different they are, because each rule set system has a different bard. Like Castles and Crusades bards are fighters. They don't have any spell casting. In 5th edition, they can do anything they want. They have everything. They can heal and cast spells and nuke everything and fight like a warrior. And this one says it's a College of Balance. So that's interesting. College of Balance is closely aligned with the old faith of the Druids. So this particular bard is aligned with Druids. Let's see if he gets Druid spells. He talks about law and chaos, good and evil. That's balance. Different factions of the Cabal. Members of the College of Balance seldom gather in formal settings. Okay. Level 3, you get the Songs of Nature. You get certain spells, looks like. Level 3, also you get Bone Homie and Bon Homie. I don't know what really that does, but it's a social interaction check, I see, for social role-playing. Level 6 is a musical knowledge. You probably can play a spell. Yeah, it's part of bardic inspiration ability. Level 14 is charming personality. And then now the next character is a cleric. So this cleric is now clerics, very complicated subject. I have videos about clerics, and I have a lot of write-ups on my website about clerics. Now, all my clerics in my Greyhawk campaign were specialty clerics because they all worship a specific god, and that specific god influences your dogma, your how you dress, the armor you're wearing, the weapon you use, any kind of special abilities, and any special bonus spells or abilities. So this one here talks about it's generally vague about their wanderings and religious makeup and things like that. And so in the top right-hand corner is a picture of a cleric. Looks like he's using his divine power. So while deities of the Flaness are detailed in another section of this book, the domains available to the clerics and those deities are detailed below. So clerical subclasses, that's where they get that at. Now, subclass is kind of equivalent to a specialty cleric. Now, they have the animal domain. So the gods that have anything to do with animals, like Obadhai, Elona, Lurge, Votan, they take an interest in beast and field and forest. Next page, I got a little confused. Page 18. On the right-hand side, it continues. Oh, I see. On the right-hand side, it continued with the death domain, but on the left, it continued from previous, which is animal domain. Okay, I got it. I wrapped it around. Sorry. Level 3, with the animal domain, you get a proficiency in animal handling. These are your domain spells. This is equivalent to, this is pretty much the same as the specialty cleric. Level 3, animal ferocity, speed of the cheetah, and animal friend. Okay. On the right side, on the death domain, you got gods like Beltar, Incubolus, Neural. Any cleric that has the death domain, at 3rd level they get the bonus proficiency in martial weapons. That's their domain spell bonus spells that they get. As I know from specialty clerics, they get this as a bonus spell on top of their normal spells that they get to memorize or pray for the day. Level 3 is Touch of Death. Level 6, a destructive spell with negative energy plane. And level 17, you get improved reaping. And that's it. So the clerics get 2 general subclasses. There could be a lot more because there's a lot of there's a lot of gods in the world of Greyhawk, many, and that means there'll be many domains. I believe 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons covered that quite a bit, and all the supplements that came out since then. There's a cleric's handbook out there. Now I know Joseph is working on a cleric book right now, so he's going to probably go into a lot more detail about this in his new publication for clerics. All right, so now we're going down to Druid, and I expect pretty much the same thing. Druid is about followers of the Old Faith. By the way, there's no real description of what the Old Faith is, but the Old Faith basically is the Flan worship of the old gods of nature, the creation of the planet, of the forest, the trees, the wind, and there's a whole list of gods that they worship that relate to those themes, and they have their own. I see that he has Druid subclasses again. He's got the Circle of the Moon and the Circle of Luna. I see that he went towards the idea of the moons, because there's 2 moons in the world of Greyhawk, and they're very distinct. And there's also a specific Greyhawk calendar with the moon calendar too. So when you're role-playing your game, if you know the date, you can actually role-play and describe the moons on different nights as they camp for the night. And sometimes that's important, because if a player is playing a druid or something, that could be even more important to him. Then you got the Circle of Selene. So the Circle of Selene, they seek balance and harmony. So basically they seek out the balance of wild and civilized, animal and vegetable, light and dark. So that's interesting about the balance. That's an interesting take on the Circle of Selene for a druidic subclass. On the right-hand side, it continues more with the colors of the moon. Like blue Selene is a much longer periodic cycle than its counterpart, Luna. So too does the Circle of Selene take a longer-term view of the world. So there's some deep spiritual connection to the moons written here. At level 3, you get the bonus cantrip. Level 3 again, a network of the Old Faith. That means you got a lot of friends out there in the druidic circles. That's really important in the Greyhawk campaign for Temple of Elemental Evil because of the Gnarly Forest. There's 7 Ranger Knights in the Gnarly, and there's also, I believe, 3 or 4 Greater Druids. And now on level 3, you also get the Circle of the Selene spells. And then below is a chart for what spells you get as bonus spells. On level 6, Level 6 is natural grounding. I guess you are tuned to the vibrations of the material plane, and you get some extra bonuses against fiends, celestials, and elementals, and single powerful creatures like archdevils and demon princes. Level 10, Shield of Nature. That spear will extend to a 1 foot radius from your person per experience level. That's interesting. And level 14 is the Force of Nature. Extraplanar creatures sense your connection to the natural world and will hesitate to attack you. You probably get a free melee round there, I'm sure. I guess they get a wisdom save against your druidic spell save for DC. That's cool. Circle of the Sun. So I guess this is another subclass. It's made up of those druids who honor the sun, tending to be more integrated with human and demi-human communities. They get bonus cantrip, they get persuasive mean, sun circle spells, and there's the chart of spells they get. Level 6 they get blindness. Level 10 they get sun spear. So these are attack spells. And on the right is healing touch. 90 hit points and non-magical diseases and insanity are all cured. It's powerful. Okay, another picture of a fighter warrior with his battle axe there and a round shield. He's probably back loony, maybe. Well, he's got the headdress of one, but he looks like a barbarian. Yeah, okay. He's probably a northern barbarian back loony or something that's related. Okay, so as a fighter, the Flaness is constantly at war. Border skirmishes between Iwis and the neighbors to the south, raids from the bandit kingdoms into the neighboring 10th, the Pale, and Ernst. Incursions of humanoid tribes attempting to overrun civilized lands. And that's a current thing. That's a current theme in my Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. I've detailed out many tribes in the area that the Temple agents are working with. They're collaborating, like the Blackthorn Orcs, the Jagged Fang tribe of Gnolls from the Lort Mill Mountains, the White Rock clan of hill giants in the area, and a couple different other orc tribes too. So now on page 22, you get the fighter subclasses. You got a Brigand, the Cavalier. There's a picture of one. Cavalier is like a knight in shining armor. And then you have the next would be monk. Okay, then the next would be monk. So I can see they have a lot of bonuses of it as a cavalier too, and it makes the character interesting. On Castles and Crusades does the same thing. Their classes have these special abilities, and their classes have special abilities too, very close to what this is. And if you scroll down, I noticed that there's no feats mentioned, because I know 5th edition is really big on feats. Castles and Crusades do not have feats, neither does like Old School Essentials or any other older system. But I know 5th edition and Pathfinder is all about feats. And I noticed he didn't really put those in here. I'd expect that these subclasses had a list of feats. So then the next one would be a monk of the Scarlet Order, known as the Scarlet Brotherhood. Oh, while monks of the Scarlet Order, known as the Scarlet Brotherhood, are probably the most well-known by fans of the world of Greyhawk, it would be remembered that there is by no means the only monastic order of work in the Flaness. Indeed, in 576 Common Year, the monks of the Scarlet Sign had barely been noticed by the world at large, although within a decade that would be decidedly changed. The monks of the Scarlet Sign had their own monastic tradition as described below. So most monks in the Flaness have their own initial training in individual monasteries. So it goes into its history, its origins, and then into this, and then down below is the subclasses. So you have Warrior of the Glory, Everlasting, and on the right-hand side is a spell slot for the monks. So these monks of this subclass have spells starting at 3rd level, and that's a nod to old school D&D, because in old 1st edition, a lot of these subclasses, like a ranger, didn't get spells until higher levels. Paladins and rangers didn't get their spells till like 7th level. That's when they get their 1st level spell. So this one is like a little bit easier to attain. And then, of course, they got their own special abilities. And then they got key points. They got Kai points. You can spend so many points per round to do special strikes. And these are the strikes that he listed here. And another picture of a monk. Now that looks like a master monk with claws. I guess he has a special... He's a warrior of the Grey Hand. So it's another order of monks that you could follow. And they're into war and fighting and massacre. Hextor. So now it looks like he might be an evil monk. Yeah, he's got rage and strikes, all these strikes that cost 2 key points, which makes them very powerful. On the right-hand side is the Warrior of Rao. Now, Rao is the god of reason, and so this is more of a pacifist god that these monks follow. And the god of Rayo is very, very popular in Viscounty area and Valuna. So it's very integral to the part of the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. So being a monk of Rayo would be very useful in that campaign. Seriously. Players should seriously consider playing a monk of Rayo, because one of the largest monasteries to Rayo is in the Viscount, is in the city of Urbabank. And my website is fully keyed with NPCs and a lot of lore and information and connections politically. And so it'd be very interesting to play that character in the campaign. So they have all their own abilities too. They're separate. And then there's a third one called Warrior of the Fist. And so this looks like more of a neutral-based fighter type that has sonic abilities. Interesting. So they got different different abilities at different levels again. There's another picture of a monk. Looks like the artist really liked creating monk class characters that give them a lot of talons and claws on their feet and hands. So they have all these abilities on the right that's listed. That's very interesting. It makes them fun to play. And then below that is different abilities at different levels. There's quite a bit here. So as you can see, they're all sonic based abilities, but makes them very powerful. At the very last one is Psychic Wall. That's pretty cool. And then they have another one, Warrior of the Scarlet Sign. Now, the Brotherhood of the Scarlet Sign, otherwise known as Scarlet Brotherhood, is an evil organization. So this is the evil ones. Now, there is some involvement with the Scarlet Brotherhood in the Viscounty of Urbabank. They are up to no good there too. It's on a small scale, and there is a couple living Greyhawk modules that focuses on that adventure. So it is possible to run into them. And so they have their own abilities and their own picture artwork too. That's cool. The next one's the Paladin. Of course, you can't play D&D without a Paladin in it. So there is an overwhelming number of Paladins in the Flaness that's devoted to St. Cuthbert, Heronius, Foltest, and Rayo. Some few will be followers of Malhahine, but her faith is still new and still dependent on the Pelor for support. I believe Malhahine did not come into existence until after the Greyhawk Wars, so I don't know how accurate that is. And then there's Delib's Knights of the book. They're small in number. For Tubo's new Dwarven Paladins, they act as protectors. That's interesting. It goes into a lot of detail here what possible paladins can be out there and what faith they belong to. So the subclasses is the Oath of Obedience. Scroll to the top on the right. Talks about Knights of the Holy Shielding and the March of Bissell. They have their own understanding of how they role play in the campaign, how they behave. And then the next page goes more down to the Oath spells. So they get bonus spells too, kind of like specialty clerics. And they get their bonus spells as well. And then you scroll down past level 20, down to the Ranger. So what I noticed about Paladins is there's only one subclass, I think. The Oath of Obedience. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of subclasses for Paladins over the years. I know 3rd edition did a lot of them. There's even a Death Knight. Okay, so Ranger on the right can be found throughout the Flaness. Now, this is something I don't care for. Like I said, I follow the formatting of old school essentials. Like the number one, they're like the best in the industry when it comes to layout design. They're really good at it. They're the UK. Obviously, they're good at it. And they make sure, and I do too in all my articles, that every topic, every class, every race, every NPC, every quest takes a whole page. There's no splitting of pages. I make sure they take whole pages. So if it's like a 3-page spread, I make sure each topic stays on each of the pages to format that section. And right here, I would have taken this section down and pushed it down and put some artwork here instead, or some kind of blurb, some kind of dialogue. I like writing a lot of dialogue in my articles too. So that would have been more interesting if you had something here and took that down to here. You probably ran out of room farther along. That's probably why you kept it there. So the Ranger has their own subclasses, which is the Guardian. There's some interesting good artwork for an action pose of a Ranger, all in gray. That's a really long bow. And I see that the Guardian is typically the archetype of protection of like forest and marsh and groups of hills or stretch of woodlands. Now this would be like the Gnarly Rangers in the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. The Temple and the Living Greyhawk modules in the area, the Gnarly Rangers are very instrumental in all those adventures. They're involved in almost all of them. And it would be very beneficial for one of the players in the party to be a Ranger of the Gnarly. because not only do they get, this special abilities that you see on the screen here, but their connections to the gnarly, the help and assistance they can get from them, like information, training, knowledge, help, assistance, a home to go to, things like that, a whole network. And also quest, because Night Ranger Win will send the players off at the Gift of Beauty quest, which is part of the campaign setting around the Temple of Elemental Evil that I set up on the Verbabon campaign guide. Now on the top right hand side, you've got his levels of abilities, special abilities like Homeland Defense, Followers of the Old Faith, Improved Awareness, and Animal Defenders. Real quick, in the Gnarly Forest, the Druids of the Gnarly leverage and use and work and collaborate with the Gnarly Rangers. So that's another thing. The Gnarly Rangers don't exist in the vacuum, that they actually collaborate and work with the Woodsmen of the Gnarly and the Elves of the Gnarly. And there's 4 clans of Elves in the Gnarly Forest. And so you're not just working with the Gnarly Rangers, but you're also working with those other subgroups. You're working with those other organizations as well in the campaign. So Animal Defenders, within the area, each creature must make a DC 15 con save, or the creature takes 4d10 piercing damage. Interesting. And then that's it. So it looks like he only has one subclass for the ranger. When I help a player create a character in the campaign, the Gnarly Ranger is one choice. There's other kind of rangers out there. There's urban rangers too. Like in the Viscounty of Verbabonk, the different towns in the Viscounty, they have their own scouts and rangers too that work with the military, the mounted borderers. And so that would be a different kind of ranger. There's also rangers that are specialized in different geographical areas, like forest, swamp, mountains, the plains. And so that's something else to think about. And there's even rangers in the Lortmill Mountains. There's a different kind of ranger. They're not a gnarly ranger. So it'd be a different subclass. In my campaigns, because I play old school D&D, we role play that. We don't need these subclasses to do that. But if you're going to be using rules like this, like 5th edition, you probably want those subclasses. All right, so we scroll down past all that to the rogue. Now, the rogue are everywhere. There's no explanation to that. But he does have subclasses. He has an acrobat. Acrobat is good at getting around, I guess. They got maneuvers, and they got jumping and tumbling and agility. And then scrolling down to catching and juggling. And then down farther to another great piece of artwork of her juggling and throwing, level 17. And then another subclass called the Mountebank. The Mountebank is a proverbial con artist. This is a role-playing based rogue. You do a lot of role-playing with this one for sure. He's got verbal patter at level 3, tools of the trade, sleight of hand, patent medicine, and at level 17, imposter. He can flawlessly act as if he's another class. Yeah, I think in Castle and Crusades you can do that a lot earlier on than this. It's just different. But in the rogues and Castles of Crusades and Old School Essentials, you can do a lot more than what this is suggesting. Okay, the next class is Sorcerer. Oh, and another thing I want to comment before we get to Sorcerer is that's it. It's only 2 archetypes. And like the Thief's Handbook back in the 90s, there must have been a dozen archetypes in there of specialty thieves that you could be. And then in 3rd edition, they created even more. So these are very small in scope archetypes, subclasses in this guide. And, the positive thing about that would be it keeps it simple and accessible to start a new campaign. That way it's not overload of choice, which is a huge problem that 3rd edition and 5th edition has. And Pathfinder. It's just way overwhelming amount of choices, which is not a good thing. So Sorcerer are sorcerers. Now, this is not really technically a classic D&D class. It's something they made up over the years because people wanted to play one. A sorcerer you'd probably find in other game systems because Dungeons & Dragons is a class-based system. It's not a skill-based system. If you want to play a skill-based system, you play GURPS. Well, some people still want to play a sorcerer, and another thing on the same subject, to be fair, depends on the campaign setting. Now, if you want to run this campaign setting that has sorcerers in your campaign world, because that's the kind of campaign you're running, then yeah, I understand that. But in Greyhawk, he says here that they're rare, so that's good he said that. So they have innate sorceress abilities. I could start joking about that. They have intuitive understanding of sorcerers in game terms. So they have subclasses. Now, they're very rare, but you can find Bitten of the serpent known as Mock Sleek, to the ancient Flan. I just created an article about the Flan, by the way. So me and some other notable Greyhawk experts, lore experts, worked on that article quite a bit, spent some time on it to really clarify things. It's a creature whose origins are obscured in the mist of time. And then there's a great piece of artwork for what a sorcerer would look like. It looks like a tool. And you scroll past that, they're known. So they do know that the Moslick does exist, and on very rare occasions it will come to someone and instruct him on his ancient and terrible ways of magic. So there's a good background here, description of what a sorcerer is all about. Gives you a good explanation. So you get the levels and abilities, special bonuses you get, level 3, and then level 3 again, Coils of the Serpent, level 6, and level 14, Power Locus. And further down, level 18, Commune with the Serpent. It's very, very rare for a campaign to ever get past 7th level, traditionally over the years. 5th edition is a lot different. They geared that game so to make sure that you do run a campaign to get you to 20th level. And I've never heard of a campaign ever getting that high before. But in 5th edition, I guess it's quite common. Level 18, Commune with the Serpent. And on the right-hand side is another subclass called Touched by the Wind Dukes of Aqua. So he went ahead and got into the core lore of the lore of Greyhawk to put this together, which is really cool. Plane of Air. That's interesting. So he's got his own bonuses spells too, going down farther until you get to level 18, the Hammer of Law. Now the next one is another class that's never been a traditional Dungeons & Dragons character class, and that's the Warlock. So he's different, where he gets his power from demon princes and other esoteric beings. Warlocks in Greyhawk should have no difficulty finding a patron. On the right-hand side, there's the subclasses, the Elder Elemental God. So none of the NPCs in the Temple of Elemental Evil are Warlocks. Not in the traditional modules or in expanded modules, and definitely they're not in my campaign lore on the Verpabon Campaign Guide 576 Common Year. It doesn't mean you can't. Also, my newest PDF article on Dungeon Masters Guild called the Temple of Elemental Evil Leadership Guide. I detail their personalities, lore, background, and politics of each leader in the Temple of Elemental Evil, along with their stat blocks and character classes. And also the Goodman's Games version of the Temple of Elemental Evil, they did the same thing. Our stat blocks are very similar because that's how they got converted from the original stat blocks to the 5th edition. And there's no Warlocks in their product as well. But if you want to play a Warlock and you want Warlocks in your campaign, because that's the kind of campaign you want, then it looks like he made this for you. So you have your God of the Patreon, and it looks like he connected his to the Elder Elemental God. Now, I'm an immense follower of Joseph Block's work. He spent 15 years writing many blog articles, analyzing discussions with Gary Gygax about the explanation of the Temple of Elemental Evil, what happened, the history of it, what he intended originally, and what's specifically written in all the modules. He put a lot of effort into that. And you can find his blog on Greyhawk-Grognard.com. And he goes into a lot of, and he came to the conclusion that there's a 5th level on the bottom of the Temple of Elemental Evil, and that's where the Elder Elemental God Shrine is. And there is no Thursden. That's not supposed to exist. It was a mistake. But there's a whole explanation by why that happened. But if you want to, but what's important here, besides that, is if you want to connect the G series and the D's and the Q series, you need to change some things to make it work. And he's done that. So he's written the T1 module, the T5 module, and the Q2 module to connect all this together. And he added the 5th level to the bottom of the temple. And so here, if you want to be a Warlock, you can worship the Elder Elemental God. Now, my voice is starting to give out. So the Elder Elemental God spells. These are generic spells that you get for a Warlock. They're nothing specific. They're not specialized spells that he created. Now, in my campaign, I used spells written by the Apocalypse, Princes of the Apocalypse module, Wizards of the Coast. I took those spells and put them in my campaign. So each of the Earth cults can use those spells for the Pacific-flavored elemental specific flavor elemental spells for each of the cleric temples, like earth, air, water, and fire. They have their own unique spells now. They still cast cleric spells like always, but some of them are more unique. Anyway, here he's got his different levels and his special abilities as they go up levels. And then as you scroll down to another Patreon. So he created the Animal Lords Patreon, Lord of the Cats. That's a big thing in Dolmenwood, the Old School Essentials campaign. And it looks like he had the same idea. And so he can be your Patreon too to get your powers from. And you get different spells. Looks like they're more animal focused. And your special abilities are too. Okay, then you finally get to the wizard, which is the standard wizard of Tenture, Mordenkainen, Bigby, and Milf. So his wizard subclasses are the School of Bigby. And you get all sorts of cool abilities for him, like the Mage Hand and Bigby Savant. The next one would be School of Drami? I do not know how to pronounce that. So he's one of the tight-lipped Circle of Eight as well, and you can follow his school of thought. So all these different schools give you different abilities and spells to cast. And then the School of Mordenkainen. So I think the thought process here is that, a lot of the spells, Greyhawk is Dungeons and Dragons. It's always been. It's de facto campaign setting. And the proof of that is in the player's handbook. Like all the spells. Those characters like Mentors, like Mordenkainen, like Tenture's Floating Disc, spells like that, those are Greyhawk characters. And so when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and you're casting these spells, you're playing spells from characters in Greyhawk. And so over the years, people kind of ignored that. They kind of didn't want to think about it. So with that said, over the years, there's been supplements out, like these spell books you could find. Like you put all these spells that they can cast all together in one spell book. And you could find them in a dungeon or something, and your player would be all excited and happy to have all the Bigby spells in one spell book. So it looks like he took that idea and made schools out of them. It's like a specialty wizard that casts specialty spells like they did in the 3rd edition, and even the Wizard's Handbook in 2nd edition, where you focused on specific spell type domains like clerics do, like evocation or necromancy, like that. You know what makes a necromancer? A wizard that focuses on the necromancy spells. That makes a necromancer. You don't need a specialty class to tell you to do that. You just role play it and pick. It's your spell selection, how you dress, how you talk, how you speak, how you act, what organization you belong to. Things like that. It's called role playing. And so it's really cool that they have these schools. And in the player's handbook, it tells you what spells these schools belong to, like evocation and divination, things like that. And so this is interesting that he tied that together like that. So the School of Nistel is another Circle of Eight. And then next one is School of Adaluk. That's Adaluk's Freezing Spear spell. He's got a whole number of spells too. And so it's interesting to give your wizard some flavor of what kind of wizard he likes, is a fan of. Because as a wizard, you can study any spell you want as you get trained with the kind of school you went to or the kind of wizard that trained you when you were an apprentice. Depending on their flavor of spells, are train you in those spells. And certain schools and universities do have a focus on their flavor of spells they like too. You can look at it that way too. The School of Otto. So he put a lot of schools together. The School of Rari. That's cool. And go down farther, there's Rari right there. And then you go further down to more, see, School of Tenture's Floating Disc. Another Circle of the Eight. And we got a new wizard spell list. And like I said, look at this chart. This is exactly what I'm talking about. See those schools? Evocation, Transmutation, Abjuration. These are specialty wizard spells. And so, as a fan of evocation, all you cast is Fireball all the time, you could be known as that kind of a wizard. That's your selection of spells in your spell book. Because traditionally, you're limited to how many spells you can know and put in your spell books. And so you want to be selective. And also, it's kind of cool to like that in a dungeon. Something unique, like a whole bunch of fire evocation type spells in one spell book. It gives it a theme, And it looks like he did the same thing here, as you can see. And look at that. And it goes all the way up to 9th level. Mordenkainen's Disjunction, Abjuration spell. So some of these spells were found in the Xanathar's Guide, which was taken from traditional Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so scroll further down, and now we have backgrounds. So I'm going to wind this. We're only halfway through the book now, and I've already went on for quite a long time. So backgrounds, he gives you a good variety of choices to create a character quickly with a good Greyhawk themed background. So I like that. That's interesting. That he's got the finesse, and he has a new background for a cultist, and a new background for an entertainer in Greyhawk background. So that's kind of cool, these different backgrounds you can quickly choose to help you create a character quickly. Because like I said before, not everybody's an expert on Greyhawk to figure this out. A dungeon master should be able to help a player figure this out. Nobles, a Greyhawk background, cool. And it even tells you where it's located at, I guess what kind of language they speak. And they have a noble rake and a northern nomad. Those are northern barbarians. A sage, another sage, a sailor, a soldier, another mercenary. I tell that to players too. You're not just a fighter. What kind of fighter do you want to be? You can be a sailor. You can be a pirate. You can be a mercenary, a caravan guard. This is what you did to get trained to be a first level fighter. That's your character. And what kind of organization do you belong to? Are you part of the mounted borderers? Things like that. Okay, and further down is a Suel barbarian. So he put a lot of thought into it. This is actually something I was looking into. Where did the barbarians come from? What kind of choices you have as a barbarian to come from? So this would be very useful. I'm going to have to look at this because I'm looking at incorporating these ideas into the campaign player section for players to figure out what kind of barbarian they want to be if they want to play barbarian. Scroll down farther to the tribesmen and the woodsmen. Now, woodsmen of the gnarly. It goes into more detail about that. That's cool. And dragonborn. So here's the species. Races, species. The species are a unique flavor to Greyhawk. So, yeah, it's pretty much standard demi-humans, dwarves, elves, gnomes, and halflings. Well, of course, you're free to load your campaign with anything you want. And that's what he did here. He gave you some options if you want to add these to your campaign. These classes, races, species are not traditional Greyhawk, but doesn't mean you don't have to not use them. And if you want to, he did the work for you, so you could add them if you want. Like these demon things and dragonborn. And what else you got? Oh, there's half-elves, dwarves, snow elf, and valley elf, wild elf. And look at that. You get bonus chart, elf traits, and your gnomes, which is huge in the Verbabank area for the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. Goliath, those are big brutes. Humans, halflings, and human by local. So this chart is already in the World of Greyhawk box set. It gives you a lot of charts about what's typically the races that are in different lands. So it helps you pick out a background where you're from or what's typical of that country. The demographics. Flan, so he does go over that. So this description right here is what the Flan look, their characteristics. And the Oeridian, the Baklunis, their languages, the Almonds, Suel, Rani. Rani is the gypsies of the rivers in Greyhawk. And the Tieflings, which is not Greyhawk. But if you want to add them to your Greyhawk campaign, you can. There's some sort of demon. I can see Ew is using them in his armies. Orc and feats. So, he does have feats. So I guess he devoted an entire section to feats. And here they all are, the feats you can choose when you create your character. And these feats are Greyhawk flavored. So that's good. So that's interesting. Scroll past that. There's not that many of them to choose from now. So he does have special spells that he created. I guess he created himself. I don't know where he got these spells from, but they are definitely flavorful with like Bigby spells. And there's a lot of them here as we scroll through it, page after page of a lot of these customized Greyhawk spells, which are really cool. I like flavorful spells for a campaign. It brings the campaign to life. It makes your wizard feel more unique, more engaging. It has more flavor to it. Now look at that. I keep scrolling through all these spells, and it's awesome. And these are all not... So something I noticed here, this is supposed to be a 5th edition product, but these are 1st edition spell descriptions, spell blocks. I like that, but I'm sure certain kind of 5th edition players might not appreciate it. So they probably want something that's more described as 5th edition. I could be wrong, but that doesn't look like 5th edition to me. So we could keep going down further, and we get past to keep going farther and farther. All these spells, it's just awesome. I like that a lot. It brings a lot more flavor to the campaign setting, which is traditional to Greyhawk anyway, because they had all these spells already, like Odalix Acid Cloud. That's cool. Okay, so we're going to keep going and going. It looks like the rest of this guide is spells, which is amazing how many spells there are. So it makes being a wizard really exciting. It really opens up the campaign more. Look at that. Great artwork to go with it, too. I like it. I like it a lot. So, let's see. So we keep going down farther to the gods of Greyhawk on page 106. So he describes about all the gods. They're divided into several ranks, how powerful they are, how popular they are, and he's got a chart for that too. All their domains and their spheres of influence and the holy symbol. I use a lot of holy symbols in my campaign, so you can instantly tell a cleric what faith he worships. And it looked like he went quite exhaustive of all the gods in the campaign of Greyhawk. Great, it's all here. I kind of wish there was a clickable link here to describe what these gods are more. But I guess that'd take a whole nother supplement. It's probably in the campaign guide, all the gods. More description of them. And then we get down to the maps, this is the same map, but you actually label them, the different countries. A little more detail there. And it's so big, you had to create it into 2 halves. And that's the end. Whew! I can't believe I went through that. That was a long guide to go through, and I did it in a timely manner, I hope. This wraps up my review of the Player's Guide to Greyhawk by Joseph Block, Greyhawk Grognard. I hope you are interested in this campaign book as I am. I like it. I want to use it in my campaign, because I think it's a perfect reference guide especially for a new player in Greyhawk that want to get to the meat of it without getting lost in the endless blocks of lore that we find typically in older publications from the past, which can be hard to look up, reference, and read. Well, tell me what you think about this. Have you bought this publication already to use in your campaign? How did your players react to it? Did they like it? Did they get more interested, involved into the campaign, excited for it after looking at this guide? Let me down below. Also, you're welcome to come to our 3 Orcs Discord. We talk about this stuff every day, all day long with all the Patreon members. We collaborate together working on the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign, the World of Greyhawk. We create these articles daily, like 5 or 6 articles a day, and I work on these custom maps and artwork and menus for taverns and NPCs, and it's an ongoing thing. And we have a lot of Dungeon Masters there running the campaign in the area, from the Wild Coast, the Fiorandi, down to Vluna, down to the Selene, with the Viscounty of Riverbank as central focus to the entire campaign play area, more like an open sandbox version of this campaign.
Did you enjoy video? Consider tossing support on my Patreon. It's best way to support orcs. If you would like to see more content, subscribe and post comments below. It better not be bad.
Well, I hope your players like your campaign as much as mine have, and may your dice ever roll true.